Morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Experimental Weaving Talk Series. We're so excited to have you all here this morning, and we're very, very excited for our speaker, Poppy DeltaDawn. I'm going to start us off this morning with a land acknowledgement. We honor the unnamed and named artists who accumulated knowledge our research in textiles draws from. We commit to respecting and learning from these enduring traditions as we acknowledge the history and presence of Indigenous peoples in the Colorado Front Range. We recognize that we occupy traditional and ancestral lands of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples, whose rich cultural legacy and heritage continue to shape this region. We honor their deep-rooted traditions, including their skilled textile practices, which embody stories, spiritual beliefs, and communal knowledge passed down through generations. These Indigenous communities' intricate beadwork, weaving, and garment making reflect a profound connection to the land and their resilience as artisans and storytellers. Welcome, everybody. As we get started here this morning, I'm going to hand the floor over to Laura. Will you all post where you're from? This is always my favorite part, is to see where everybody is joining us from this morning. Post that in the chat. We can't wait to see what Poppy has to say. I'm going to hand the floor over to Laura.
My mic is on. We are live and in person from Boulder, Colorado, which means we're doing a little more technical interpretive dancing than we do normally. So if you hear us saying things about mics, sorry about that, and just be vocal in the chat if you're having any technical difficulties on your end, like you can't hear a speaker or something like that, and we'll fix it as soon as we can. Oh, look, someone from Kansas. Do you know them? I'm so excited to once again host our Experimental Weaving Talk series. This is our second to last talk of a series that's continued to just be really enriching and nourishing in times that don't maybe feel exactly that way. These talks are brought to you by the Unstable Design Lab. We are a research lab housed at the ATLAS Institute at the University of Colorado Boulder, which is actually where we're sitting today. So we're in a room across from the lab, hosting in person and live streaming to you all. Let's go to the next slide. One of the big projects we've been pushing, aside from the talk series, which has been great, but we've been really working hard on open source design tools for drafting, both for shaft looms and jacquard looms. We have a series of free and online workshops that we've been hosting. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to check out ATACAD at docs.atacad.org. Also, all of our talks in the talk series are archived on our website and on YouTube. So this has become a really lovely collection. Poppy's talk as well will end up in this archive, within a week after the talk takes place. Okay, so without further ado, I would love to welcome Poppy DeltaDawn, who I'm looking at through the screen and in person. So it's like one of those mirror effects where it goes infinite. Anyway, I was up since 6, and I had a lot of coffee. But I'm really excited to welcome Poppy. Poppy has been our experimental weaver in residence, has been located with us in the lab for the past, 2 months, maybe a little more, and has brought so much amazing energy and chaos delight. I feel like chaos delight goes together. She's going to share a lot more about what we've been working on, but her practice has been super inspiring, has brought so much value to our space and our community, and we're going to try not to let her leave. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, Poppy, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to turn my mic off, my sharing off. I'm going to have you start sharing and have you take it away. If you do have questions that are coming up during the during the talk, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a hard out at 10 a.m., so we will be fielding questions just until then. We'll have a short Q&A after that Stephen will moderate. But yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll drop supporting links and things as they seem relevant. Okay, Poppy, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Laura and Stephen, for that introduction. So appreciative to be here. I have just had such a great time. Laura should be careful what she wishes for. Um, and I'm just going to get right into it because some of you know that I always have a lot to say. And so let's just make sure we get out of 10. Um, In 1866, Ludwig Feuerbach famously proclaimed, Der Mensch, I can't do the German, man is what he eats. Since then in 1932, from an Italian prison cell, Antonio Gramsci considered Feuerbach in his essay, What is Man? He writes, since diet is one expression of complex social relationships, there is some truth in the saying, man is what he eats. But in the same way one could say, man is the clothing he wears, man is his habitation. Food, dress, housing, and reproducing are elements of social life in which the whole complex of social relations is most obviously and most widely manifested. Gramsci is saying that our natural resources and material culture amount to more than simply fuel and protection for our bodies. My research is predicated on the idea that man, aka people, are the clothing that they wear. That food and clothing and the very states we live in are expressions of complex social relationships. Humanity is not in its own object category. Rather, humanity is a constituent of the natural world. My work is a practice of contemporary art, design, and culture. I consider my research to be an aesthetic expression, something akin to my art. In the same way, I think about my lectures. In Art as Experience, 1934, John Dewey writes, flowers can be enjoyed without knowing about the interactions of soil, air, moisture, and seeds of which they are the result. But they cannot be understood without taking just these things into account. And theory is a matter of understanding. Dewey, a psychologist and progressive educational reformer, thought that the separation of doing and thinking was shit. Okay, he said, undermining the unity of knowledge. John Dewey also was part of the American pragmatist philosophical tradition, which above all favored truth and experience. Nothing can be proven unless it is done. And as Etta says, you got to weave it to believe it. And honestly, if the American Society for the Defense of Tradition, Family, and Property has a problem with John Dewey, then he must be doing something right. The Academy, and by extension, conventional European epistemologies, are rooted in the Cartesian idea of a mind-body separation. This, combined with our educational industrial complex, has produced distinct and complex, yet fallible, delineations of contemporary art, design, and craft. To operate with intention in any of these disciplines, all methodologies, skills, and histories are necessary. Okay, so I'm going to travel around a lot today and make a wide arc. I'm going to talk about teaching and learning, about education. I'll talk a little bit about why I'm drawn to lineage and to legacy and to cultural transmission, and a little bit about what I've been up to in residence at Unstable. Last month, Rollins College and the Institute for Citizens and Scholars hosted a conference on how the liberal arts strengthened democracy. It was called John Dewey, 90 Years Later, How the Liberal Arts Strengthens Democracy. Florida's Rollins College, founded in 1885, brought Dewey's radically progressive liberal arts education to the university. In 1931, Rollins hosted the first national curriculum conference on the liberal arts, chaired by Dewey. The college's first president, Hamilton Holt, wanted to integrate the idea of open-ended inquiry, critical analyses, and the Socratic method to universities in place of the traditional lecture course. In 1930, Rhodes scholar John Andrew Rice was hired to teach Greek and Latin and carry out the progressive agenda. Long story short-ish, several other faculty were asked to sign a loyalty pledge supporting the college's administration before being fired or resigning in solidarity. In 1933, the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, of which John Dewey was ironically the first president, voted to censure the college for the firings, which were antithetical to academic freedom and tenure. So, Black Mountain College was formed by a collective of faculty members and students led by John Rice, who were reacting to the fascist tendencies of academia. What did Rice and his colleagues do after they were shut out? They ran full speed towards a utopic vision of democracy, art, and an aesthetically informed life, a la Dewey. In response to the firings at Rollins, the President Holt replied, "When you fire a cook, you don't go out and get a committee of neighbors to tell you what to do," unquote. Holt's complacent sensibility brings me to ask the scary question: how experimental can a college which relies on capital, market realities, and ultimately the state really be? Black Mountain College was famously indebted throughout its 27-year history because they did not intend to profit financially by the initiation of their curricula. It's a much longer history that's not so tidy, but to avoid getting too deep into the weeds, the reason that I bring up Rice and Dewey and Black Mountain College today is to provide some sort of model of what art can look like at the end of an empire. This brings me to David Graeber. Graeber was an anthropologist, author, and activist who died in 2020 of pancreatitis stemming from COVID-19. Graeber was originally a professor at Yale until the institution declined to renew his contract. Graeber and his supporters strongly suspected political motivation stemming from his anthropological research on. So what does this all amount to? I can't help but think about Graeber and Rice and what they did when confronted with censorship and fascism and the market-driven realities of their tenure in the academy. I'm not suggesting that we start a new radically democratic college dedicated to integrative whole education and civil and ethical responsibility, but like, doesn't that sound nice? Oh. David Graeber, rather than starting an experimental college, helped to form and mobilize the Occupy Wall Street movement, which is detailed in his book, The Democracy Project, A History, a Crisis, a Movement. In this short book, Graeber clarifies what exactly democracy even is. Dewey and Graeber had this preponderance of democracy in common. Democracy is not a form of government, but a way of life, an ethos, and a cultural value. Occupy Wall Street was a utopic experiment that, for a brief time before the state tore it apart, successfully established an autonomous and liberated zone in Lower Manhattan. I lived in New York at the time, but had just graduated college. Graeber writes his book in his book that the movement was taking hold of a destabilizing moment in our country's history following the 2008 financial crisis. Participants, most of whom were current or recently graduated college students, lamented a problem that I have recently also been lamenting. We followed all the rules and did what we were supposed to do. So why don't we have anything to show for it? And why aren't we free? Free from debt, free from state-sanctioned violence, and free to be ourselves. My student loan payment last month went from $250 to $1,100. Last week, I had a meeting with the dean from my college and asked him, do I need to worry about being put on a list? I know that I haven't talked about weaving yet, but international scholars are being disappeared. Visitors from Europe are being turned away at the border. Our academic freedom is yet again being threatened. The story of these immigrants fleeing the Nazis and still managing to carry out their life's work and resisting fascism through education is the only thing right now that brings me solace and any amount of hope. And after all, spaces of textile production have naturally proven to be spaces of resistance. Perhaps this is owed to the collective nature of so much textile production. Perhaps generative handwork and material culture remind us the makers of their agency and autonomy. Julia Bryan Wilson writes a whole book about resistance in textile production throughout history, Fray, Art and Textile Politics. I want to talk about the research that I've been undertaking as part of a long-term. I'm going to stay here for a second. Thank you. I want to talk about the research that I've been undertaking as part of a long-term project that we've been working on since I've arrived in February. In May of October 2024, I released my first publication in collaboration with Loom Room of Chicago and Bookbindery and Press for the Birds Trapped in Airports, based in Los Angeles. The project is called Digital Weaving to Save the World. The first chapter or segment, Ratio, serves as a historical and cultural introduction to pictorial or image-based weaving, which we know is at least a 2,000-year tradition. What differentiates the project from a simple historical accounting or a simple tutorial guide is that it is an artist manual, which is to say, I devote segments of the book to cultural production or art making with weaving and woven form. I think about the various ratios that are used within weaving and within woven design. For my residency at Unstable, I proposed a second segment of digital weaving to save the world titled Resistance. Resistance is vital to the fabric of our society, just like it is vital to the conception of cloth at my loom. Resistance is, in part, a step-by-step guide on sectionally warping on a TC2. I have been considering the real power of art and aesthetic value because I have committed my life to contemporary art and cultural practice and the sticky intersection of the two. And despite Dewey and Rice and the Albers and experimental colleges, we as a culture and a community are still not over the hump of the very Euro tendency of trying to pull apart and isolate art, design, and theory. Art, material culture, and the process of becoming, both as the maker and the thing being made, are what has made us human. Through material culture, we have not only formed our society, our social culture, and the physical world around us, but we have literally formed human cognition. Through spatial and material considerations, we think about our bodies, which includes our brains. The brain isn't the only player, though. We were spinning thread as Neanderthals before we were human, nearly 90,000 years. Textile production is embedded within our DNA, which is perhaps coincidentally also twisted into a double helix and is compiled to make a whole. Our technology and our art, it isn't ours. At Loom Room, I started off with this quote by Amadou Mpate Ba, who intonated that the transmission of knowledge is not the thing itself. Writing is the photographing of knowledge, but it is not knowledge itself. Knowledge is a light which is within man. It is the heritage of all the ancestors knew and have transmitted to us a seed, just as a mature baobab is contained in its seed. And I first encountered this in Glenn Adamson's craft reader. We've passed our traditional knowledge down for at least 90,000 years. That's what I take from this. The artwork that I make also belongs to my mentors and teachers and their mentors and their teachers. We are all related. Okay, really quick. I want to consider Sophie Tannhauser, the author of the 2019 Worn, A People's History of Clothing. I have no criticisms on Tannhauser's eye-opening account of how textiles are objects of power. I love that book. I've read it twice. However, I do have one little gripe I want to share with you. In the Weavers chapter of Worn, Tannhauser critiques Annie Alber's November 1938 essay, Work with Material. She quotes Albers, like any craft, it may end in producing useful objects, or it may rise to the level of art, end quote. Tannhauser explains the false hierarchy of useful objects and art objects as they relate to Navajo weavings and European contemporary art objects. She stops short of the possibility, though, that the art object may also have a use. The art object is an object of contemplation and ultimately of possibility. When my students make a weaving and hang it on the wall, I ask them, what can we use this for? What can we think about using this for, even if it remains on the wall? Does it remind us of a carpet, of pockets, a quilt? Textiles intrinsically complicate the conversation between objects of use and spiritual secular objects of contemplation, aka contemporary art as we know it today. Tannhauser's point is well taken. Indigenous communities within the Americas and globally have been creating objects of both use and reflection for millennia. It is not an either or, and this ultimately was Dewey and Rice and Albers's life's work, which is one reason that Albers, after spending time in Central and South America and Mexico with indigenous weavers, returned to Black Mountain College and taught students backstrap weaving. Alber's quote is taken out of context in this instance. Just before she concludes her text with the quote used in Worn, Albers notes, quote, we use materials to satisfy our substantial needs and our spiritual ones as well. We have useful things and beautiful things, equipment and works of art. In earlier civilizations, there was no clear separation of this sort. The useful thing could be made beautiful in the hands of the artisan, who was also the manufacturer. She continues, free experimentation here can result in the fulfillment of an inner urge to give form and to give permanence to ideas. That is to say, it can result in art, or it can result in the satisfaction of invention in some more technical way, unquote. She was differentiating between a personal aesthetic experience as dictated by the maker and of technical objects meant to stir innovation and evolution in form, i.e. samples, etc. The hierarchy she is indicating is not between, say, a blanket and a painting. Also, Albers wanted to be a painter, but the Bauhaus didn't permit women in that workshop. Her attitude must have been deeply affected by the deeply shitty place she lived in. Okay, so listen, that was my scripted portion of the talk, and now I'm gonna kind of wing it a little bit and show you all a little bit about what I've been doing here and what that work has stemmed from. And I'm gonna ask Laura to just give me a little hand signal when it feels like I should shut up. And I'm just gonna switch. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. Is it okay? Are we good with timing? Okay, awesome. There Is No Kansas is a mural that I installed last summer in St. Louis. It utilizes the same systems and logic as mechanical Jacquard punch card technology. There Is No Kansas, in some ghostly way, is actually sort of a practical joke. There is also no weaving. Using laser technology, I create card stencils with the designs that I build for my physical weavings on the computer. The mural made in St. Louis is made with the temporary marking chalk that was removed immediately after the close of the exhibition. I wanted to engage with the warehouse space, its walls already marked up with a proprietary contractor cipher. The settlement of this land hinged on technology and a physical alteration. Zebulon Pike, the first American Army explorer to cross Kansas, and his accomplices, Stephen Long and Edwin James, built an exotic mythology for the place they encountered between here and Colorado. Edwin James, the chronicler of the expedition, described the Great Plains as uninhabitable by a people depending on agriculture for their subsistence. His 1823 map labeled the area the Great American Desert and was among the first published accounts of this region that settlers in the eastern United States encountered. The production of the mural was made by tiling the stencils and spraying the chalk into layers. I began with the weft, and then after that layer was completed, sprayed the warp on top. Just like in thread weavings, the two colors interact and create a rich, mathematically perfect weaving of neon pastel hues. When I show this to others, I think about creating a lineage of traditional knowledge, specifically of cloth production and of resistance. Kansas has served as the place of 19 different United States Indian colonies, divided by tribe between the 1820s and statehood. Though Kansas was named for the Kansas River and the people, the land that the state of Kansas occupies has been the site of many people, and the United States is just the most aggressive and most recent. This work is a forceful assertion by ghostly architecture, a weaving of a warehouse's chalk markings, the most ephemeral of systems of planning of physical space, and the existence of Kansas is called into question. And I think that that's really fair, considering that the state of Kansas continues to call my existence as a woman of trans experience into question. And so this work, oh no, oh no. Let's see, there we go. Oh no, you missed this one. Sorry, I'm talking to myself in front of you all. So here's me working on the mural, and here's a former map of the 13 of the colonies of indigenous communities. And this work is a reso print that I made here at Unstable at the ATLAS Institute. And it was informed by the chalk mural. And so for those of you who don't know, the reso is a kind of multicolor photocopier, Xerox, essentially, that works a lot, much like the way screen printing works, just kind of like weaving works. And here's a detail of that. And so you can see that I printed the weft stripes first and then laid the warp over top of it with, for you weaver nerds, AKA the whole audience, Takate. And surprise, you're all here. Sorry. And so this is Mimi, I don't know Mimi's last name, Mimi Chef, who is really generously giving the lab a Riso workshop. And that's her very personal own risograph that she lets us use, which is just so sweet. And so the one on the top left is a collaboration. Um, you can see the sampling club bit from Etta Sandry. And then below is another print on found paper that I think Mimi printed at one point. Here are just a few sort of material samples that I've made in the past year, let's say. And I just wanted to show sort of like maybe, I don't know, how I think about texture and color and samples in general. I find samples to be really important, vital to my work. They're these spaces of potential where kind of anything goes. The stakes are lower in a sample until the sample kind of gets its own feet and starts to, I don't know, sing to me. This is BBW or Bitch-Born Woman. And, you know, this is a brand new piece that I haven't shown anybody yet. And, you know, this is maybe, if anybody can think about back to the Michigan Women's Festival, this is kind of like where TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminism, kind of came into the mainstream with their restrictions on trans women at their festival. And famously, they required only women-born women enter. And so I am that. I am a woman-born woman, but I'm also a bitch-born woman. And just to show how much of a bitch I can be, this is AMAMP part 1. And just for fun, I dropped in a little comment that I got on Instagram 8 weeks ago. Thank you, Instagram. And, you know, like, it's not me speaking, it's the weaving. So when you ask me about my pussy, it's just confusing. And this is AMAMP part 2. And here they are side by side. Last year, they were both installed concurrently, one in Chicago and one in New York. And they were made on the same warp, but part 1 and part 2 are actually sequential. Part 1's the one on the left. And I just wanted to kind of, something that I'm really excited about is showing my growth as a weaver and showing my skill growth and develop. And so ask me about my weaving, ask me about my weaving. That would be the third weaving. AMA-MP part 1, you can kind of see it's not as sort of precise because I was still kind of learning, like the loom and the warp was teaching me. And so for AMAMP part 2 on the right, there were not any mistakes because I figured it out. And I really like to have this sort of record of learning and evolution because, as John Dewey said, change and growth is actually the only valid parameter of learning and education. And this is male attention, and it's about male attention. This is Satyr study. And the satyrs kind of make their way into my work very often. These are the satyrs from Disney's, I want to say 1939 Fantasia. I will just say that kind of recurring motifs appear in my work because I feel like I keep on weaving the same motifs because I'm kind of like in pursuit of like the perfect satyr or something. So like I keep on making these satyrs and I love these, but they're like not, I want something else and I'm just not done with the satyr, just like I'm not done with Felix the cat. And these have meaning to me. They have personal and deep meaning to me, but I think about them in relation to the sampler and in relation to these, they're kind of like these vehicles for potentiality. The woven structures that are imbued, that they're imbued with, that compose their actual being, they're the vehicles for them. This is on the left, a diagram, a blueprint of a technical drawing of a braiding machine and on a 3D braided machine. And the one on the right is a little DIY setup for a kumihimo disc. and kumihimo is a traditional Japanese braiding technique. And so while at Unstable, one thing that I committed to was to kind of expand my sort of thinking about weaving. This is sort of like weaving off loom, right? Like if you think about braiding is really just a kind of weaving. Many laces are just a kind of weaving. And I'm thinking about how to innovate weaving further. And one way is away from the floor loom. And so while at Unstable, I've been 3D printing the machine on the left, and hopefully by the time I leave, I'll have it running. And this is France Engineering developed this machine, and you can purchase it open source online. Here's just a couple of other little samples of off-loom weaving. The one on the left is a band weaving, tablet weaving that Etta and I worked on one Friday evening. And the one on the right is a little pipe cleaner basket, kind of, let's call it a sample. Yeah, let's call it a sample. The image on the left is a Hilo spinner, and a Hilo spinner is another 3D printed open source piece of technology that is what it sounds like. It's a spinning machine, and it's completely automated. This is the labs, the Unstable Design Labs personal spinner, and they let me play on it, and I broke it immediately. But look at that twist. We're working on it. And yeah, thanks, Mike. He's not here. And the one on the right is, of course, a little shaft loom draft, because Unstable Design Loom Lab has a Davi, and so just been experimenting with drafting. And this is our little setup in the lab. I think that's it. Thanks. So I'm gonna stop my share. I stopped my share.
Perfect. Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you to moderate and get us into question mode. You'll just fill the blank space.
Hi, thanks so much, Poppy. Really appreciate this presentation this morning, and thank you for all of the thoughtful comments that you made, thinking through these histories and these weavings, this work that you've kind of laid out, this kind of piece of starting with the Black Mountain College. I wondered if you would want to go back into that for a second and tell us a little bit more about that, how that that time period has influenced your pedagogy. You didn't really talk at all about your experience as an educator, and I know that's also an important part of your studio practice as well. So drawing on that experience of Dewey, how does that come into your classroom?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, it's true. I went to these two fancy private art colleges, and like I told you all my student loan payment. So like, I paid for it. I paid for my legacy, my lineage, kind of where I come from, and I consciously did that, and I don't regret it. Just to go into kind of the politics of, like, I don't know, debt, because David Graeber, like, who I mentioned, who started Occupy Wall Street, it's really predicated on debt. It's really predicated on just the state kind of scamming us all, asking us to pay debts that nobody actually really needs. And I knew that consciously going into my education, but what I really wanted was to be a part of a lineage, even as a young person. Now I'm old. I really wanted to be a part of the same lineage that my mentors came from. And so when I was at MICA for undergrad and worked with, Christine Woods and Piper Shepherd and Cissy Bryant and Chrissy Day and all these amazing educators, I kept on noticing that they were coming from the same programs. And, I really drank the Kool-Aid. I really did. They were, without my understanding it at the time, they were really engaging in these sort of like, again, like Socratic method, open inquiry, critical thinking, through making artwork, learning highly technical skills while also making meaning with them at the same time. And I didn't realize at the time how rare that was. Um, and it's something that I want to propel forward, because I just feel so lucky. I think though, the caveat is that it shouldn't come with $100,000 price tag. This should be education. And to think about sort of the liberal arts model that we're all kind of sort of students of, essentially, was really eye-opening. It was eye-opening to realize that John Dewey and Albert Einstein were on the board of Black Mountain College. This, uh, John Rice was like kind of a screw up. He was kind of a screw up and like kind of a wild professor. And he people questioned his techniques, um but should he have been fired for that? I don't know. But I just love that he said, well, I still have a lot to give. I still want to teach. I still want to be a part of this educational lineage and start something. And so he just did that. And, their college wasn't accredited. It was radical. It was not legitimate, and it was really expensive to go. And, despite all of this, we kind of most artists in America come out of this tradition. And I look around and I kind of see our academia, like our academic tradition sort of like wilting, withering. And I just realized that like if we as educators don't somehow nurture the legacy and lineage that we're building, then it could go away, because it was the way to get visas, because it was the way to get into this country during World War II. Art specifically got like made its home in academia out of convenience. And for better or for worse, though, like that legacy, it's like nested in here in the university. And so if the university goes away, then what happens to our artistic traditions? And so I think it's just really important that we keep thinking about how to kind of integrate spiritual and cultural practice with theory, with contemplation, with critical and logical reasoning and analyses, like, because this is all really valuable no matter where you end up. Anyway.
I thank you so much. That was a great answer. I'm still processing it all, but I'm like, yes, we have to keep the system going. There's a couple of questions here about about the relationship between 2D and 3D in your work and how sometimes your work looks like cross stitches. But I want to like sync those questions together to ask you a little bit about the warp, because I know I'm working on this book with you too here, and I know that's a big thought for you. And you talk a lot about how weavings are not necessarily a 2D thing, but we perceive them that way in our conversations we've had in the lab. And so the questions here are just a little bit about your material distribution, how you think about 2D, 3D, and also like I want you to talk about that in terms of how do you think about 2D, 3D, and how do you think about the warp in relationship to that?
Sure. Um, um, okay, well, so funny. We were just talking yesterday about how weavings they are perceived as 2D, but what I say, anyone who's around me for like 1 week can tell you that I say weavings are like weavings are actually little architecture, right? They're like little spaces. There's actually dimension and form and room in the weaving itself. This is a question of scale, actually. We're actually just really big compared to the structure. We can't go into the room, but we can see it. And so I don't think I've ever made a 2D thing except for like that reso. Like I don't think about any of my weavings as two-dimensional plane. I think about them as these portals, but not metaphorically. Like, you know, you can enter the weaving. Maybe not with your whole body, but with your eyes, with your logic, you know, like when you see a double weave, you see that they exchange places when they weave into each other. You know, you can logically say, well, like I can enter into the middle of the weaving, maybe. You don't need to go in to know it's there, though. And so I think about architecture a lot, and so did Donnie Albers. And a lot of weavers think about sort of spatial dynamics at play, and that's why engineers and other mathy people love weaving too. I wanted to say too about the warp, it's 50% of the weaving. And something that my mentor, Christine Woods, says, but I remember that she said very often, like, it's like filling the warp, like the shed, which is, I don't need to explain it to you all. The shed, you know, what's in the shed? Put something in the shed. Like you fill the threads up. It's like a container. It's the vessel. Is the shed a vessel? That's an inside joke for Kate. Anyway. Yeah, is the shed a vessel? So yeah, that's what I think.
I love that. I've actually somehow never thought about the shed as like a wood shed, like in my head, like it never has appeared that way. But now I'm always gonna like open the shed and think about like putting wood into the like it's like it's so good. Okay, so we have some other questions here about text in particular in your work. Like, I love also that the text in your work, you talk about portals. I mean, the text in your work is one, like acknowledging the presence of the weaving as an object. It's also like almost feels like it's carved out of that work. And you use text a lot. And also your text is so expressive. So can you just talk a little bit about your relationship to language and writing in your
Sure. Yeah, I do. I use text a lot. I use language a lot because I think that text is actually just a material in the work. I think of it as just like thread. It's I think about it again, remember when I was talking about like the satyrs, like as these vehicles for the structure, like just like the satyrs, text can be a vehicle, a recurring motif, and you know, like AMP, like or male attention, like these things are like they exist for the benefit of the experiment, the place where I get to try something that nobody has ever seen in the world. Um, and, but it's a both and, right? Because not only is the text a receptacle or a vessel or vehicle for the experiment that I'm about to do, for the innovating, but uh, that text, of course, has its own autonomy and agency. It doesn't matter if I say it doesn't mean anything, it means a lot. And so I think a lot about sort of the kind of how text is alive and has its own agency. We were talking also yesterday about Ed Ruscha and his text paintings, and when I started making this work, I didn't really know about that work. And then I saw his retrospective and it was like, because he made that work so long ago, you know, and that the words, they move, they're mutable. And that's something I really love. I also am, like I said, a bitch, and I'm processing my life and the world around me. And I'm so angry. I have so much rage, and the rage has to come out. And if it doesn't come out in my artwork, we're going to have a problem. Yeah, it's just true. And so, you know, I often, you know, I feel really committed to vulnerability in my work. I think vulnerability in artwork is so interesting, and it's like what makes work powerful for me. And so I try to say the scariest thing I can think to say sometimes, that I just really, really, really don't want to talk about. And I put it in my work. And you know what? It's like really been productive for my being, for my spirit. So you know, samplers, if you think about historical like needlepoint samplers and stuff, like they often worked like this. Like if you think about like, you know, when young girls were forced to do needlepoint instead of like reading, yeah, crazy. Some of them really hated it, and they would take out their aggression on their needlepoint. They would write letters, they would plea for help. They would say, I hate this. I want to do math and do math problems and weave in needlepoint. Like I love that the kind of authorship comes out, this kind of like spirit comes out, despite our best intentions, sometimes even.
Thank you, Poppy. We have a hard stop this morning. I wanted to hand over the floor to Laura for just a few announcements. And Laura, if you had any other comments this morning, thank you so much, Poppy. We are so happy to have you here. And Laura, I'll take the floor, hand the floor over to you.
There, I unmuted. Great. Now we're definitely over time. No, I'm kidding. Thank you so much, Poppy. That was great. I guess one thing when you were saying, I always say something about the 2D, I was like, what you always say constantly, which I've really grown to love, is just, I love weaving. Like every day. It's like, I love this. I love weaving.
I
You
do.
forget that we can actually like love these things, and it's so delightful, and your talk has been so inspiring and powerful. And I have my own rage scene, which is lovely. I just wanted to call attention to our last talk in the series, which will be on April 23rd at 9 a.m. Mountain Time by Carolina Velez Munoz. And I am so excited for that. So I hope you'll join us again. And as much as we can in the chat, send Poppy a big round of applause. And yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.